In the 149-year history of Aston Villa Football Club, we are the only supporters who have ever experienced 15 straight league wins at Villa Park. That's almost hard to comprehend when you consider parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents clicking through the turnstiles at Villa Park who did not get to experience anything like that. That's the first thing that crossed my mind upon hearing the final whistle on Saturday. But then to topple two of the three biggest title contenders in the league in the span of 48 hours is like a child getting that special Christmas gift that they'd been hoping for all year. Let's talk about that and many issues as we review Aston Villa 1, Arsenal 0. One of many things that crossed my mind this past weekend was how important that Ollie Watkins goal actually was at Bournemouth, because the Cherries have had a bit of a turnaround here. They won 3-0 at Old Trafford. And remember when I said at the beginning of this week, I'd bite your arm off for 5 out of a possible 9 points? Well, we made it 7 out of a possible 9 points. And you just wonder what kind of implications that 90th minute equalizer might have when May comes around. So this week has provided me with an enormous sense of gratitude, especially at this time of year when we take inventory of all the things that we're thankful for, and to also never take these footballing moments for granted. And that is especially true in the wake of Benjamin's passing, a person I've never met, but by all accounts, on par with some of our most prominent supporters like David Bradley, even the Prince. But at the end, we're all just people. We're all Villa fans and part of the Villa family. And it's very bittersweet that there are so many new whole tenders in the sky who can't now experience history being made in person. Disturbing, too, that so many of them are young as well. So a lot of blessings have been counted this week, believe me. Welcome officially to the Holy Trinity show, where we discuss the 3 key moments and issues that defined Villa 1, Arsenal 0. There at Villa Park on correspondent duty for us was Alex Dutton, teacher by day, guitar legend by night, Villa fanatic 24 hours a day. The benchmark for a crackling atmosphere at VP is still the Everton game from August of 2019. Tell me I'm wrong about that in the comments if there was a better example in recent history, but that atmosphere was being challenged this week. And I'll talk about the home form and the Unai effect a little bit later on, but the key numbers will back up what my eyeball saw anyway, which was a Villa performance that was second best in a lot of categories, apart from the most critical one. And among the many statistical mismatches, ground duels won is almost as wide as it's been this season. Which brings me to my first key issue. It is a very good sign when you can win a game without playing at your very best. And credit to Arsenal, they prevented us from playing from our defensive third into midfield and from our midfield to the front third, which is kind of our bread and butter. That acceleration through the neutral part of the field, that space and that time was denied. And you saw the numbers. We were second best in so many categories. We won on Saturday because of mental fortitude. On Wednesday, that might have been our best performance of all time against the defending league and European champions, where we battered them in virtually every single category. You need to win both ways if you want to continue progressing as a football club. Major issue. Home cooking. And I've been saying it since I started this show. If you could turn your home into a fortress and earn 2 to 2.5 points average per game in a campaign, well, then you take a lot of pressure off your away performances. In fact, you can go away from home and maybe play with confidence and some risk. But how has Unai Emery done it? How has he taken Villa Park and turned it from what was at times a toxic place with a lot of impatient and ill-tempered fans and turned it into one of the most formidable fortresses in all of Europe and created a symbiotic relationship between the players on the field and the supporters in the terraces? The first strategy and tactic that he used, and he used it clearly and consistently, was to acknowledge the role of supporters in the on-field success. We are with the supporters are with us, and in virtually every post-match media availability, he always says, we are thankful for our supporters. And over time, those people that are paying good money to watch live and travel with the team are truly starting to believe that they are having a direct impact on the on-field success. And that is strategic, and he's leading it. In the past, if a Villa manager didn't clap at or acknowledge traveling support or the Holt End, he'd get slaughtered on the socials afterwards. Well, Unai Emery never does any of that. He shakes the opposing manager's hand after a game and heads straight down the tunnel. They don't slaughter him because from day one, he has made it clear that this is a dual energy transfer between the terraces and the players on the field. And there's 100% science to this. Adrenaline is a real thing. It's a hormone that provides players with as much as a 1 or 2 or more % increase in things like bravery, confidence, belief, energy. And sometimes when they're dead tired mentally and physically, the roar of the crowd can give that little boost of adrenaline to just help get the game over the line. Unai Emery made a mention of that on Saturday. The roar of the crowd, the support from the terraces is like having a 12th man on the field. And he has been using this strategy during his media obligations, both consistently and strategically. This has been a plan from the very beginning to incorporate supporters and make them feel like they are part of the success. Now, there was another very specific, subtle, and calculated move that Unai Emery made in the early stages of his tenure that I think has had a profound impact on Villa's success at home. Do you remember what it was? I can't quite pin down the exact game where it started, but he had asked his players to arrive at Bodymoor Heath and then bus together to Villa Park. And I've never heard him talk about this specifically and the reasons why, but I do have a couple of theories as to why he might have taken that route. One of the biggest ones is just helping players manage their lives. Here's your deadline. You need to be at Bodymoor Heath at this time. They don't have to worry about what to wear to the game. They don't have to show up individually in their fancy motor and their fancy fashion. They're all wearing the exact same thing. They get on that bus together and they arrive together as a unit. Unai talks a lot about creating this sense of family within the squad and I think the club as a whole. And I imagine that would have been hard to achieve if you're asking all the players to sort of arrive individually to the stadium at different times in different vehicles. And now he's sort of galvanized the whole thing. And I think helped to focus the players collectively as they arrive at Villa Park on a coach in the same way they would arrive at the enemy's manor. It seems like a small thing, but apart from 3 home league losses and 2 home cup losses, Unai Emery's seen a lot of wins at Villa Park since taking over. Another major issue for me, and you might think I'm being ethereal here, but it's just body language and how players conduct themselves both on and off the field. Brian Clough said this famously and often. Players take on the personality of their manager, and that can be good and that can be bad. If your manager is calm and always level-headed and doesn't go after the fourth official and the referees all the time, guess what happens? The players don't either. But if a manager is bombastic, emotional, temperamental, petulant, up and down, well, what happens to the player? Steven Gerrard, 1 minute could be sliding in his trousers on the field like he did when he was a player, and the next he could be slumped back into his St. James's Park seat looking miserable because he's completely bereft of ideas and how to change the course of the game. We've all seen that Unai Emery is a passionate footballing man, which extends beyond his role as Aston Villa manager. I think he's an obsessive, compulsive, bordering on savant-like footballing genius. And underneath that passion is a very steely determination to never get too high, never get too low, always be very consistent with your messaging, which he is, to the point where some people are complaining he says the same thing all the time. Well, there's a reason behind that: to not give bulletin board motivation to an opponent. He's always very gentlemanly, very gracious, and, there's a huge difference between arrogance and humility. I think he is adamant that the entire club functions on the side of humility. As I'm sure you do, I watch those social videos of the players coming back in from the field through the tunnel and towards the change room as they react post-game to their victory, and the guy who's shooting the video giving them high fives. And the one thing you'll notice about these past two very difficult and emotional victories against good sides, the reactions aren't over the top. There's obviously passion and joy there and a lot of pride. And maybe this comes a little bit down to fatigue, but it's not over the top. It's measured. It's confident. And I'll say this about Mikel Arteta, already suspended after just 15 games through yellow card accumulation. Certainly a factor that he wasn't on the touchline. What does that say? Does his team need him to be that bombastic, emotional guy fighting against referees, fighting for decisions? Because he certainly played the victim card after the game on Saturday, blaming decisions and the referee rather than allowing an early goal, which was probably preventable, and not making the most of the chances that they did have. So how do the Arsenal players react? He's not there. Do they need him that badly in the technical area to conduct that orchestra? And are they then victims or complaining to referees or making excuses about the things that didn't go well? And just on that point, and I think this is really important because I believe Unai Emery has a consistent strategy in this regard as well, that the manager's behaviors can actually influence refereeing decisions over time, like in a campaign or even in a manager's career. And Unai Emery's approach seems to be take the high road. Do not criticize referees publicly. Do not be bombastic and bombard fourth officials. Do you ever see his staff yelling at referees or going crazy on the touchline? I don't. And anytime a contentious issue is put to him after a game, he always starts by saying, we respect the decision of referees. Let the players play, do the talking, worry about that. And you'll notice that we haven't really been on the receiving end of many controversial decisions this year. In fact, we have yet to concede a penalty, touch wood. Now, the other approach is yell at the referees and the fourth officials, criticize them publicly after games, blame them for wins and losses, take 5 yellow cards inside 15 games and be suspended. And if you're a referee, a human being, and you have a 50-50 decision to make, could you see how potentially you might be influenced depending on who the two managers are in the technical area? And I'll tell you one more thing. Every single match official, from the VAR down to the head referee, will be prepared for the difficult personalities within each squad for the game that they're officiating. They'll know who all the problematic people are, and they'll prepare for that. I think Unai Emery is very subtly managing referees like he manages everything else. On to the match itself. And one of the major issues for me from Saturday was Unai Emery's in-game player management. Incredibly, he named an unchanged side from the one that comprehensively beat Manchester City just 48 hours before. And at the pre-Arsenal media briefing, he made mention of the critical nature of rest, recovery, even nutrition. And a week ago, I said that in this week, the physiotherapy teams, the sports science group, and the nutritional people would be as busy as the first team technical staff. And that was to make sure that the players' batteries were recharged between games, because 3 games in 6 days is taxing for any athlete in any sport, despite what Alan Shearer and Tim Sherwood said on Sunday when they went with the old, back in our day, we had to play 3-game weeks all the time. We never complained about it. We didn't have all this sports science stuff. Well, yeah, you weren't as fit. The football was slower, and you didn't have the best players from around the world in your league. Load management is a modern football thing, and it's here to stay, and it's basically like watching the battery draining and getting down to that critical 3 flashing red lights. And it's supposed to be used in a complementary fashion to Unai Emery's eyeballs and his instinct as to whether a player is mentally and physically spent. So the introduction of Moussa Diaby at halftime for what looked like a dinged-up Leon Bailey was totally logical. But then Unai Emery introduced another set of fresh legs every 10 minutes, including Jacob Ramsey for Yuri Tielemans. He brought on Matt Cash and Leander Dendoncker for Ezri Konsa and Boubacar Kamara. And then at the 76-minute mark, he brought on Alex Moreno for Luka Dean. It's one thing to have a very settled, solid, and successful, frankly, starting 11. That's kind of new for us. But to be able to introduce quality and different dimensions and attributes and depth, this is also new for us. And keep in mind, we're doing it without Buendia and Mings. Although, have you seen Buendia walking around? He's with the team and looking totally comfortable in how he's walking. That's a very encouraging sign. For me, the introductions of fresh legs at the right time was a difference maker in this game. Big moment, the penalty check in the Battle of Brazilians as Douglas Luiz made contact with Gabriel Jesus in the box. Initially, I didn't even know this incident happened. I totally missed it. But as the replays kept going, I started to fear the worst because, as you know, Premier League match officiating could be like flipping a coin and taking that kind of a guess. And I also wondered whether big club bias might enter into the fray. But just like all of Jared Gillette's other on-field decisions and interpretations, Stockley Park backed him up, which is exactly how VAR should be used. Not a clear and obvious error by the referee. Same situation for an errant elbow by Diego Carlos, which sent Arsenal fans into an even further meltdown. Interestingly, Carlos did get a yellow card, and VAR doesn't have jurisdiction over recommending yellow cards. But what I think happened was the length of that check and the fact that VAR said it's not enough for a red card meant that Jared Gillette took that to mean, okay, not enough for a red card, but I'm going to take it upon myself to book you, Diego. Just before we get to the top 3 key issues or moments, guess who was at Villa Park experiencing yet another Villa victory live and in person? Yes, Paul Handsaker of 24/7 Services, the sponsor of this show, who has been to a lot of games this year, including some away. The only loss he has seen in person was at Anfield. He missed the Everton Carabao Cup game because of work, so he's to blame. And his daughter, Eve, who was also there, is now convinced that she is Aston Villa's good luck charm because in her entire life, she's never seen the Villa lose live in person. Kind of like me. There's only one thing that makes Paul as happy as witnessing an Aston Villa victory, and that's being with his crew, doing a project, and having happy clients afterwards. That's what he does. And it's interesting how Villa's rise is coinciding with the 24/7 evolution. There are so many things happening behind the scenes. I can't wait to share some of them with you, and that's going to be soon, by the way. Big moment number 3, Ødegaard outmatched. This one scared me. There was a large sense of relief when Emi Martinez got his big mitts on it. And if there's one player in the Arsenal squad that worries me all the time, it is the Norwegian. And just like Douglas Luiz's chance at Bournemouth last week, was this one of those ones where it was a player missing a good chance or a goalkeeper making a good save? And I think similar to that one, this was a little bit of both. And when you see it from field level, it sure looks like Emi Martinez actually makes a play on this about a split second before the shot, as if he anticipated it or saw something in Ødegaard's body shape. And Shay Given, who was a pundit at halftime in this game, made the same observation that somehow Emi Martinez did read it, and had he not left early, there might have been a very different outcome. I think Martin Ødegaard will have been tossing and turning a little bit on Saturday night, wondering, could I have planted it across at the back post or put it in the top corner over Emi Martinez? Could I have had a little bit more composure in that moment? And again, I ask, does Emi Martinez's presence, his reputation, his stature force players into rushing or snapping at chances? And if you talk about Emi Martinez with Arsenal fans, it's a very sore subject. They get very defensive when you bring up the fact that he is a better goalkeeper than both Raya and Ramsdale. And on this day, there will have been nobody more elated, satisfied, relieved, and happy with that victory and the clean sheet than our dear DB. Big moment number 2, the hand of Havertz. This was a torturous, untidy, late game, climactic moment that shaved years off of my life, and had it gone the other way, would have thrown a big, wet, stinky blanket over Aston Villa's performance and potentially given Arsenal an opportunity for one of their patented late-game winning comebacks, and we've seen a lot of those recently. Exhibit A, the win at Luton last Tuesday. And I know some of the supporters in our club have a complicated relationship with Australian referee Jared Gillett, but on this occasion, not only was he very close to the action, but he was decisive in his on-field decision. Handball Havertz. But then we had to endure what felt like an endless review, which also featured a hint, a whiff, an indication that maybe Matt Cash's arm might have played a role in the goal. Now, my initial reaction when I saw the replay the first time was that Jared Gillett got this spot on. Kai Havertz's arm played a significant role in his ability to ultimately score, and the law on this matter was buttoned up not that long ago. But still, this was the classic example of us having to suffer for an extended period of time before confirmation came that Jared Gillett's instincts and initial decision were correct. And the number 1 big moment that defined Aston Villa 1, Arsenal 0, McGinnian Spinorama. And by the way, McGinnian Spinorama, trademark, Holy Trinity show. Aston Villa has scored first 11 times this season in all competitions. They've won all 11 games. And when they've led at halftime, they have a 100% winning record. So obviously, scoring first, especially in a game like this, is going to have huge implications. And scoring so early, you would think, would be great for Villa because they kind of make it a thing, scoring first, and then as the opponent tries to come back into the game, they hit them for a second and sometimes even a third. But in this case, as Andy Townsend kind of correctly pointed out, he was the pundit on my broadcast, in this case, did Villa get that early goal and psychologically say, you know what, we've got the goal to hang on to, let's focus more of our energy on preventing the equalizer rather than going and chasing that second goal. This goal was simply beautiful from start to finish, coming at the end of an 11-pass move, and I want to focus on the last 2 passes because they're of the exquisite variety. Yuri Tielemans both takes and then plays the ball in 2 touches while in flight, keeping the fluidity of the move going and playing it really in the only place that can kind of entice Leon Bailey to drive the ball forward, which he's been doing so well for us of late. But if that ball is a foot to the right or to the left, it's picked off. And if he either overhits or underhits it, the move is over there. And Tielemans just has this sense of knowing where to be and what to do, and he does so quickly. And in this particular instance, rather than scoring in front of the Holt end, our beloved Bailey plays the role of provider. Crazy Tony Adams was a pundit on the halftime panel, and he spent the entire time breaking down why it was a terrible goal to concede and why there was nothing but mistakes by the defending players. It's always the same from ex-defenders, isn't it? It's always terrible defensive play. It's never a moment of attacking brilliance, even though Leon Bailey basically commits 3 Arsenal defenders himself by being very good and shifting from right to left so effectively. That's his jam right now. That's why he's being so successful. His ability to shift from one foot to the other and leave defenders wondering, well, what do we defend on this guy? Anyway, he commits all three, plays it between them all, and John McGinn's first touch sets up his pivot. And after that, he really just has to place it where he knows the goalkeeper probably isn't. It's a monumental moment in the game, obviously, but how big a moment could it be in the context of the season? Let's now marvel together, you and I, at the statistical brilliance and the implications of winning on Saturday, as out of 24 points available at Villa Park this season, they have accrued 24 points. That is just surreal to me. We also improved against the top six, taking now 12 out of a possible 18 points. We've scored first 9 times. Our first half plus minus improves to +8, and we can add a 4th clean sheet to the tally. Up next, a trip to beautiful and picturesque Mostar as Aston Villa wraps up the group stage of their first ever Europa Conference League campaign on Thursday. And rotation-wise, Unai Emery has a couple of easy decisions already made for him with the yellow card accumulations to Luca Dean and Douglas Luiz. I'll actually give you my predicted 11 for the game on Thursday in just a moment here, but I really don't get a sense that Unai Emery cares whether they finish first or second and whether they have to play an extra playoff round or not, because their priority is still the Premier League. And then there's this issue of punishment for Legia Warsaw. What a horrible club that is. I actually complimented them last week on how they conduct themselves on their field and how they've built the squad on a shoestring budget, but off the field, this club should be banned. They should have been banned already, Alexander Seferin, UEFA president, and the fact that it hasn't happened yet makes me think, yeah, they're not going to do anything. They're going to chicken out despite the fact that this club causes problems everywhere it goes. And if there is a ban or some kind of punishment, that too could have influence on Aston Villa and where they finish in the group. Douglas and Dean will almost certainly start in this game because there's a long enough time since Saturday to recover, and they're not going to play at Brentford the following Sunday. You noticed Robin Olsen wasn't even in the squad on Saturday. I wonder if he has hemorrhoids from sitting so much. But I cannot see Emi Martinez starting this game. After that, Konza and Longley as center backs make sense. I could see Den Docker carrying on and playing in midfield. Jacob Ramsey and Zaniolo also supply fresh legs, and I think it's going to be Diaby and John Duran up front. The question I wonder today, given that the Europa Conference League title gives you a nice shiny trophy, but ultimately a spot in the Europa League, will there come a change in priority down the line if Villa is still legitimately in one of those far more lucrative and high-profile Champions League places? Oh, we can dream. These are simply remarkable times for us Villa fans. And I've brought up Leicester and 2016 a couple of times on this show recently, and interestingly, so did a reporter at Unai Emery's pre-Arsenal media briefing, and his reaction was very interesting. He chuckled and he said, "I dream, but we are focusing on the process and the next opponent. We'll worry about the implications later on down the line in the season because it's a 38-game season." Until Zrinjski Mostar on Thursday, be well, savor all of this, and as always, up the mighty Villa.